Welcome to Still Catholic, the podcast where real Catholic conversations can go off the rails. Whether you're a devout Catholic or simply curious about the faith, Still Catholic invites you to join in on the journey where the dialogue is as unpredictable as it is enlightening. I'm Dorothy.
I'm Father Chris.
And I'm John.
And today we are going to be talking about my truth.
Her truth. What about my truth?
Is there such a thing?
Oh, I have truth. Yeah, for sure.
I don't know. I think your truth is very relative.
Yeah, when you watch a lot of social media and kind of public debates on campus, it's like a neat thing that I think is actually very much rooted in Scripture. It's what St. Paul used to do, go into a public space where everyone was welcome and they would, debate or propose certain things. But one of the phrases that we're hearing more and more today is this thing called my truth. And the question is are we allowed to own the truth like that? Are we allowed to tell other people what they have to believe about ourselves? Like, where are the limits to this? Where does it have some truth to it? Where does it maybe go a little too far? And so the church actually sometimes calls this relativism. So that's the term that has been used in the past, but it's often not being spoken about today. So I think that whenever I hear the phrase my truth, I often think about relativism.
Right.
It's that my truth isn't your truth. My God isn't your God. What I think and what I feel aren't necessarily how you think and you feel. Let's just be okay with our different opinions and let's live and coexist with each other, even while we're in contradiction with one another.
Right.
But then there's no truth.
That's right.
And that's the part that is, to me, so obvious. There's got to be a truth. Because you think about gravity. You can believe it's not real. But if I jumped off the roof of my house, truth would be I'd probably die when I hit the ground.
Yeah. So I think one thing that is good to first examine is if there is no truth, like if there's just my truth, is there such a thing as error? Because if I can never possibly make a mistake, which sounds like a very prideful, arrogant thing to ever say for anyone. I don't know. Raise your hand if you've ever made a mistake.
Right?
I did once.
I'll just put both my hands are up. Okay. So I think that if there is nothing that corrects us, such as experience or a good friend giving good counsel or reading a book, anything like that gives us the opportunity to say, I didn't know that before and I thought it was this and it's actually that.
Yeah.
Then we run into some serious problems with humility and even just relationships. But what about gaslighting? Does gaslighting exist if there's no truth? There's just my truth?
It's true.
So explain what gaslighting is, just for those who may not know that
Sure.
term.
It's a phrase that's often used as a form of manipulation. So, people can play games with the truth. I remember once confronting a friend of mine who used some serious words. And I said to him, you said this to me. And he looked at me and he said, no, I didn't. And I didn't know what to do with that in the moment because it was very clear in my head what he had said. And so it made me feel like I was crazy. Like he was denying something so obvious that was there. But he clung to this false narrative about what happened so as to avoid confrontation and conflict and admitting he was wrong. And I stood in that. I stood in the truth, not my truth, although it was mine in a sense because I experienced it. So there is such a thing as my truth, but it was in conformity with reality. And so that's where my truth is healthy, is when it's in conformity with reality. And that's the church's teaching is not against the phrase my truth, but it's subject to judgment. It's subject to discernment. And if we don't believe that error is possible, then we're all gods and we're all creating the truth rather than discovering it, rather than humbly submitting to it. And that means that we might not have humility. And that's the basic virtue to being a good person.
If we are constantly creating a false narrative. Isn't that usually an indication that you're hiding from something, that you're hiding from agreeing to a truth that you don't agree with to make yourself look, feel, live better?
Yeah, I mean, our fantasies, our fantasies can give us an escape and an illusion, but the problem with them is that they also cut us off from real relationship, because now you're in a relationship with something that doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. And so if people don't really get to know the real you, then they can't ever love the real you. They can just love whatever fantasy you're selling them. And so that often leads to a lot of loneliness, isolation, self-hatred, all sorts of really just horrible things that God doesn't want any of us to experience. So being grounded in the truth is really critically important, but it's more complicated than, just calling it objective truth. So the church actually uses a word, a phrase to describe kind of how we approach ethics and how we approach truth. It calls it soft objectivism. So we avoid what might be called as a fundamentalism, or just this idea that all truth is just purely abstract and it's not a lived reality from within our own experiences. And so some people call that kind of an existential dimension. I know I'm using a lot of philosophical words here, yeah, big words, but there is a sense that we make the truth our own, our own. And so the truth that is really there becomes a part of us. And that's a beautiful, good thing. We're in communion with beauty and goodness and truth. And unfortunately, I think sometimes in the world today, we just kind of latch on to whatever just kind of accommodates how we would like to feel at that given time. But there's no integrity in that. And that actually leads to a lack of freedom. It means that we're enslaved by our impulses, by what we'd prefer reality to be, living in a life with rose-colored glasses. And so if we are bold enough and courageous enough to face the truth as it really is, then we'll, as a church, understand that this kind of soft objectivism, which is saying that, yeah, there are certain things that, are relative to us, but there's also things that are absolutely objective. And so we have to tease that out. So a lot of that is done actually by Aristotle long before Christ, where he was able to talk about virtues, for example. He said, there's an objective principle, which is to do things in moderation. So that's objective. But then there was this relative principle, which is, but what is moderate for you in this regard might not be moderate for everyone. So that's relative. So he actually was able to see that objectivity and relativism had some overlap. They weren't opposites. So, for example...
Yeah, give us some examples, because you're
very abstract right now.
Yeah.
Me. I know. Okay, so if a person is told to eat moderately, one person has a different metabolism than another.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what is moderate for one person may be one hamburger, and for another 2. And so they're both eating different amounts of food objectively, but they're both objectively eating moderately. And so the mean, or the moderation of that desire to eat food, is relative to the person. The same thing too might be the case with health issues, right? I'm allergic to peanuts. I actually am not, but let's say I am. Well, I'm not going to eat them then, but another person could eat them and it would be healthy for them.
Right.
And so the church recognizes that there are differences between persons, but there are also things that keep us common, and so our human nature, why we exist, that we have free will, those are things that are in common. And certain things, therefore, are always wrong all the time, like the 10 Commandments.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
But then the application of more complex realities is when we have to discuss the relativity of it, or the circumstances of it.
So the church is a little bit relative. So we don't just throw that word right out as, okay, because I know that it became the buzzword about 10 years ago, that you'd hear the word relativism and people would just go, boom, nope, there's 100% pure truth on everything, but it can't be the way you described it. There are moderations to that depending on the situation.
That's right. So the phrase that the church always used was absolute relativism is what we reject. But we don't reject relativity. And if we did, we'd have to throw out St. Thomas Aquinas, because he talks about three virtues: temperance, prudence, and courage have a relative mean to them. Justice doesn't. Justice has an objective mean. If I owe you $5, I owe you $5. Doesn't matter if I'm rich or poor. The contract is I give back what I borrowed. But when it comes to, courage, like a person in grade 2 is not going to be asked to confront someone in grade 8, if there's bullying going on. And so there's a sense that we have to respect the difference of the person and the uniqueness of their circumstances. So the church wants to safeguard kind of over legalistically controlling and blandly applying principles to every possible circumstance. We would say that there are some things that are always wrong in every circumstance for every human being because they are human being, such as murdering an innocent person or stealing from someone. All of those things are always wrong in every circumstances, but there are a lot of things that are up to the personal judgment of the person as well, such as what they eat. And so what is relative to them is an objective fact for them, but it's when you compare it to other people, it becomes relative.
So what if somebody's searching for the truth? Where do they start in a certain topic to know that they've actually landed on the truth and not a version of the truth that's incorrect?
Well, depending on what kind of truth they're looking for, is it a truth about themselves? Then it requires self-awareness. If it's a truth about how a conversation went down with family and friends, then it's part of their memory. And sometimes that can be defective. So we have to turn to each other and ask what actually happened. If it's a truth about the faith, then we have to turn to what God has revealed about himself through divine tradition and sacred scripture, and the fact that the church is guided by the Holy Spirit to interpret those realities. And so that's where the humility has to come in on our part. Humility just means to be grounded in reality or of the earth, but it just means that we're willing to be taught and not just say, well, that's not the God that I want to believe in. Who cares what we want? And I know that sounds kind of cold, but some people want Oxycontin and they want to abuse it. Some people want heroin and they overdose on it. What do we want? Okay, we want this, fine. I'm aware of that. But what is the actual case? And how do I learn to want what actually is the case? That's a more mature question. And that's one with integrity. So I think that when we're talking about relativism, I think sometimes we only apply it to doctrine, right? We only apply it to moral issues, and it needs to be applied to that. But I often like to talk about our conversations with one another and our relationships, because I think that's something people more relate to. If people really do believe gaslighting exists because they have experienced it, I think they'll understand the limits of just saying my truth and no objective truth. I think they'll understand that that's actually not my experience of lived reality. You said this, that happened, and saying that it didn't is a form of manipulation.
And we don't get to a point where we have a deep relationship. It's a very surface relationship. Because I can think of relationships that I have where I'd love for it to go deeper. And I'm sure there's others that could say the same about me. I'm not pointing. But it's like stuck. And it's not a relationship that I even desire to, delve into every now and then, because I know I can't go past a certain point because we don't agree on something, or there's a narrative being put out that you can clearly see as false, but I'm supposed to act like it's not false and play into it the whole time. How do we work with those people? How do we have conversations with them that are healthy, that help tease out some of that to get to a better place?
It's tough. If someone is playing games with the truth and they're manipulating others, and they're probably also manipulating themselves, you can't always have a conversation with them about that, because no matter what you say, it'll be twisted. And so if they have the lack of habit of being honest, then what foundation is there to a relationship? So I think we have to be careful with that. But I think one thing we can do is we can appeal to their experiences, because a lot of people that do that are very fearful. They're so afraid of living in the truth and trying to figure out what's at the root of that. Because if we believe Jesus is the truth and he tells us not to be afraid, then maybe there's a fear there that's unreasonable as well, rooted in it psychologically or spiritually. So some people live in a fantasy because they're terrified of living in a world where they have faults, where they are confronted. For example, like some people are terrified of being corrected. They think if I'm corrected, then I'm of no value here. Mm-hmm. But that's actually the church's understanding of correction is it's an act of mercy that's actually done to build the person up and to bring out their full potential. It's like a coach, a football coach that doesn't enable his team just to play to have fun, but teaches them technique and gives them the habits and the strength and the encouragement and the challenge to bring out the best in them. And so if we're so soft that we can't take correction, then we will never fulfill our potential. But sometimes the fear is that any form of correction about our perceptions is a personal attack on us as individuals. It's a rejection. It's a form of saying that the person doesn't exist. Well, no, what we're actually saying is actually what does exist is very good, and we want you to love that. Mm-hmm. So we see it in all sorts of different ways. We see it today with some very difficult issues, which we don't have time to go into completely, but we see it with sexual issues in the church today. We see it with even just our relationships with gaslighting. We see it with doctrine too. I remember one, I think it was Oprah, but I could be wrong. But we had one person say that God was like an energy, that he could be whatever you wanted him to be. Mm-hmm. And so all these kinds of things are dangerous ways of approaching truth, whether it's with our truth in this, the objective sense of that, like who am I, what am I? We have to be first willing to admit that we make mistakes all the time about ourselves.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I personally, I don't mind being critiqued in the way that if it's helpful, if this is what others think, then I have to be open to that, because that's how we'll be able to work with them, work with that person. I know people that are, it like you said, Father, it's very hard to try to get them to see a particular thing because you're afraid they're going to be hurt. But in helping them see that, well, this happened, and if you can be open to it, then it will help their relationships if they're open to that. There's nothing wrong. We're not perfect.
No,
I am. I hate.
No, you.
John's living in his truth right now.
I hate being corrected. Lori will tell you that right now. I shouldn't say I hate being corrected. This is going to sound terrible, but I'm going to say it. Mm-hmm. I hate being corrected by those that I think have no ability to correct me. I'm okay with being corrected by the smarter person at the table, Father Chris, for now, until I get to a subject where I think I'm better than him on it, and then I don't want to be corrected. I'm very self-aware of my errors in life.
Mm.
Yeah.
And we can be very sensitive about that. We can be seeking like a perfectionism, and our identity can be wrapped up in whether we make mistakes or the narrative of the lives that we've given ourselves. And so when those things are destroyed and they're too connected to our sense of who we really are, our core, it can really wound us. And that's why it's so important that from the church's point of view, if we're going to start off with identity, we're going to start off with the fact that we were created very good, created in the image and likeness of God, and nothing that we believe, do, or say will ever change that, regardless of how we feel about ourselves. And so if we have that real sense of identity that's rock solid, then we'll understand that any correction is just about our character or just about our mind, but it's not about our existence. It's not about our value.
Okay, so when right now comes to mind are families who may have different beliefs. How are we open to having a conversation about different truths in a gentle
without the sword.
Yeah, without leaving the house, I don't know, being really angry. What's a good way of being able to talk about things?
Yeah.
Or do you have any?
How do you survive Christmas dinner?
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. I mean, it happens, right?
It's in every family. Yeah. This whole thing that Pope Leo is talking about recently is, Pope Francis talked about it as listening sessions. Pope Leo has kind of been using the word dialogue a lot more, which I think is a really good term because dialogue, it has a sense
Two-way.
of two people, but they're not oriented towards themselves. They're going on a journey together towards the logos. So dia logos, which is the logos is the word or the truth. And so when you have two people in a spirit of friendship saying, we want the truth, let's work on it and arrive at it, that's very healthy. But if someone isn't interested in the truth, they're interested in my truth and not self-determining what the truth is without any humility, dialogue is impossible.
Right.
And so that's where, and so then we have to get into the root of why is this person not open to that? And if that's the case, then it may be fear. It's often fear. When we don't want to live in reality, we're hiding from it, right? So I think in those cases, what we want to do is try to start with milk, which is what St. Paul says. We show people that we love them and we care about them and that we're a safe person to talk to about things we don't agree with.
Right.
But what we don't want to do is create as a culture the idea that a safe environment is where everyone agrees with you.
Right. It's okay to disagree. I think of
It's
years.
okay.
Sorry?
Go ahead. I was going to say, it's okay to judge sometimes, I would think.
And we have to define what sense that we judge. Our intellect is made to judge. So there's 3 acts of the intellect. One is our ability to understand things. The second is to make judgments, which is just simply saying this is that or this is not that. And then the third one is our ability to reason, which circles back to making better judgments. So if I say the sandwich does exist, that's a judgment. I've made a judgment. If I say this person did this, that's a judgment. If I say this person is this, that's a judgment. So our judgments are there so that we can make decisions and act. If I doubt that the sandwich exists, I'll never eat it. So I have to make a decision. I have to make a judgment in order to act. So that's the basic understanding of what judgment is. But when we make judgments about things that we don't have the right to, like a person's motives, for example, that's when we go beyond what we've actually experienced. And so we have to be very careful about the limits of our judgment. And that's where we have to be reasonable in them.
And that's why we have to listen to each other. So when you're talking about listening sessions, and we had them back a month, 2 months ago now, for our pastoral plan. And so people came together. We heard the talk about what that particular pillar was. And if you haven't seen our pastoral plan, you can find it on the website. Type in pastoral plan and boom, you'll be able to see it and read it. But we did have listening sessions, which were very new for a lot of people. And we came together in a group of usually 5-6 people. One was a recorder. And the question was asked, Father would ask the question, and we all prayerfully answered. You had silence between each person answering, and you just answered it how you saw it. So many people were so thankful for that, because a lot of times when you're in a conversation with people, you might get cut off. You're in the middle of and then somebody, boom, oh yeah, I feel like this. It's like, no, let the person talk. So for the first time, a lot of people had a chance just to share their feelings and not be interrupted. The next person would share, and it wasn't about what the person before them said. It was their, what do they feel? So these listening sessions are really important, and we have more coming up, and we'll be talking about that at another podcast, But a lot when you're talking, Father, it reminds me of a parent and a teenager. A teenager wants to hear certain things, but has the parent really listened to to that teenager about what they feel.
Yeah,
So
so there's
listening is so important,
Yeah.
not just telling them this is what's going to happen.
And there's a listening where you're listening to what they're saying, and then there's a listening to where you're going underneath what they're saying. And so that's one of the things that I like about the format that we use for listening sessions is that pause between what a person has said and then the question of why did they say that? What are possible reasons why they're coming from this place? That's called deep listening. So we're hearing what's not being said. We're hearing why someone might be motivated to say what they did. So if someone's complaining about something that's happening in the church, they might give you the facts, but you might ask, why is this affecting them in a
Right.
negative way?
Yeah.
Maybe they're lonely. Maybe they feel like they're not seen and known and loved and heard and all those kinds of things. So we go deeper than just the surface.
Right.
And that's real listening. And when people feel like that depth of what's going on in their hearts, regardless of whether it's aligned to the reality of the situation or not, when they're at least heard out and they know that they're understood,
Yes.
then you can begin to approach that subject in a healthier way.
Right. They feel, heard. And you're showing them empathy as well.
And that's the hardest part for some people, because when you say listening sessions, I'm over here going, well, you're just listening. Is somebody correcting the people that are saying things that aren't correct? And I think there's too many of us. I'm one that likes to jump in and try to correct, hopefully in a nice way, but too soon. Because my fear is always, if you have a family conversation and somebody is talking about, I don't know, the universe and its vibes and not what I believe to be correct, I want to correct it before they leave. Because I think if they walk out the door with that, somehow I justified what they said to being correct by not, saying something different. So at what point do you have that conversation where you don't enable somebody to keep believing something that is not true?
Yeah, and that's one of the common concerns about the listening sessions and synodality is that where does the discernment piece come in? Because discernment is just a matter of making judgments. It's a matter of separating, the truth from falsity, from good from evil. So when we're able to make distinctions and clarify things, that's a very helpful thing that we need to focus on. Now, the documents on synodality do talk about the importance of discernment, but we have to look at what stage are we in right now. The communication of what I think and what I feel is we have to express that in order for us to discern it. And sometimes it's not until people share what's actually going on in their mind and they hear it out loud that they realize, no, that's not that's not the right way of thinking about it. So during the listening sessions, we had people talking in circles. And I overheard one of the gentlemen say, you know what, I said this in the first round, but now I'm changing my mind.
Yeah.
And it was a very good movement. But that's what conversation can do in the spirit, being able to listen to what other people say and integrate it. So in order for this to work, people have to be prayerfully disposed to just sharing what they understand and be open to hearing what other people say and see how they can integrate it. But the other thing that I think is really important is that you limit the scope of what you're talking about. When we come together, we're not talking about anything that hasn't already been determined and figured out. So we're not going to talk about things that the church doesn't teach. That's already determined. Why run people through a discussion that's not going to change anything? That's not charitable to them. It's a waste of our time, and it's not giving the benefit of the doubt to God. And so we're just going to talk about what we have control over and what is unique to us. And so you have to limit the scope of the conversation. So sometimes in the listening sessions, they go off the rails.
Oh, yeah.
And you have to rein that in so that it can be productive.
Right.
Yeah, I think off the rails is just human nature. I'm not saying, meaning, people do that. I do it. When we have our conversations before as we're preparing for this podcast, we go completely off the rails and we have to be reined back into what the topic is. I hear from so many friends, especially when it comes to people not in the church, their family's not going to the church because there's something they believe in that they believe is incorrect, and they see the church incorrectly. So their tactic is not listening; it's telling. They have a telling session, and I think that's where we fail the most. And I've learned where I fail the most. People just aren't open to telling. People are sick of hearing me tell them where they're wrong and have a telling session. So just listen to me, I'll tell you the truth. It is a much longer play and a harder play for listening and dialogue. But I think listening and dialogue is the only way where somebody, actually embraces that and comes to the conclusion themselves that maybe they were thinking incorrectly as opposed to being told.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's always hard for me to hear that a little bit just because like my charism is teaching. So part of what I have to do is to tell people the truth, to propose it to them. But I'm not a good teacher if I don't know the people I'm speaking to. And I don't recognize that there's a process involved when we wrestle with what's been presented. So if I just explain it and expect that to be enough, that's not helpful. So I need to get to know. One of the things that I struggled with in high school was math. I was failing it. And I needed a tutor. I needed that one-on-one contact to be able to really wrestle with the ideas. And my tutor had to learn where I was going wrong. So we had to have a conversation. She had to listen. And then she could give me better analogies, better instruction. And so I think it's a matter of, some people want to tell everybody else and tell them to listen. And so everyone wants to become the teacher. Some people only want to listen. We need to see how both of them kind of work together.
Yeah.
So there really isn't a my truth.
There is. It's kind of what we call as the subjective dimension within ourselves, or what sometimes is called existential. So my truth is me kind of saying, I surrender to this narrative of things. The question is it united? Is it in conformity with reality? And so none of us go through this life without that subjective dimension. The question is, are we conforming it to reality? And so my truth exists, it's just not infallible. And then that's where the dignity of the person has to be respected, that there's that process of surrendering to the truth, making it our own. And the question is how are we held accountable in that process? And we're always held accountable to the objective truth. So the statement goes in philosophy that our mind does not measure reality, but reality measures our mind. So the standard that judges our mind is reality. And so and that's actually how in some cases mental health used to be described, right? Like if you're not in touch with reality, it means there's delusions. And so that's, and even with anxiety, people can be feeling as if their house is on fire, but it isn't. So they're in a state of anxiety when they don't need to be. How do I get my emotions to be as far as possible in conformity with the circumstances of my situation, which is that I can be at peace right now? So all of those kinds of things are really important for our wellness and health. And that's why if we go too far with my truth, what we're actually doing is really enabling ourselves to be tortured by not only our fantasies and our preferences, but also internal lies about ourselves that are just destructive and harmful to us, such as anxiety and depression.
So the hardest part I always get to is, so are we just to be comfortable sometimes with those relationships that are shallow? Or is there, or should we always be working on trying to get to a deeper level on those relationships where we kind of strip away all that, gaslighting, and we strip away what we see as not really reality? Like what?
Yeah. Going back to Dorothy's question, right? Which is how do you have the conversation? Is we start with trust and then we move to facilitating curiosity in the person. So if a person's wondering a little bit about the church's teaching, and they ask a question, don't give them a gallon full of information like we've been doing in this podcast,
Yeah.
mostly me. But don't, so a spoonful of curiosity can be drowned out by too much information. So, so someone says, why do you pray? You say, what do you do when life gets difficult? So you've implicitly answered part of the question, but you've also given them the opportunity to reflect on what they do and why that might be helpful. And then after, they've developed that curiosity, they move into a phase of openness. And so when they're open, they have this sense of, maybe I am open to seeing things in a different way. They're not quite changing how they see things, but they're now trusting and open.
Yeah.
And then you have to challenge them in that stage to try to seek the truth themselves, seek out this, our faith or this teaching or this or that, and seek out information, more information on what happened before they make a judgment. And then finally, we have the last stage, which is when they make that truth their own, which we call an encounter. So it's when they experience on a deep level the truth. It becomes their own because they've experienced it and they've surrendered to it. And so those are the 5 stages of good conversation and dialogue. But it's very organic, and sometimes it's drawn out and long.
I was just going to say, sometimes that's a long process, because we've talked to lots of parents and grandparents, and they hurt for their children and their grandchildren. And so maybe it's a question, well, how are we dealing? If I have that problem, how am I dealing with it? Am I being open to hearing, why do they think that way? Why are they not following the faith that they grew up with? Why is that, And not get angry. Listen to them and let them think about it. Let them take that away for a month, whatever it is, and then have that conversation again. Because they're probably not going to come around by just us telling the same thing over and over. Most people don't work that way. Yeah.
Now, that doesn't always work in every situation, because, some correction is required regardless of whether there's trust or there.
But they have to be heard. You can't just be talked to all the time.
True. I guess it just depends on the context, right? Like if a police officer is trying to address an immediate crime, it's not a situation for a dialogue.
For sure. But I'm talking like a parent and a child, or an adult child,
That's right.
You've got to have that dialogue. You've got to have some patience.
And the same thing is true, like in an employment situation, there are some things that need to be corrected based on the job.
Yes.
And so, sometimes not everything is open for debate.
Absolutely.
And so that's where, but one thing I would say is that, let's say you're giving feedback to someone, and it's prudent to do that regardless of where your relationship is with them. I wanted to share a technique that I think Toastmasters taught me, which I think is helpful. It's good, grow, great. Good, grow, great. So you start off with something good. You frame the correction as a growth point. So instead of, because a lot of people interpret correction as a personal attack.
Yeah.
But you show, no, this is how I'm bringing out potential in you. And then you end with something great. And I think that's just a good way of approaching correction in any situation, because it shows them, A, that you know them.
Yeah.
And that you don't just see the bad, you don't just see the areas for growth, and that you end with something great.
That's a sales technique. In sales, we call it, I understand your problem. This is what I did to get over that problem, and this was the outcome that was better.
Yeah.
And it works. What I always have to come to grips with is, and I know what you mean, Dorothy, when you say, how do we get through to them? We keep saying the same thing. I think sometimes it's just not going to be us. And sometimes in your lifetime, you're not going to see that change in everybody. And I think it's rarer to see, those moments where you secretly high five in the background that, hey, wow, it's really changed. And we have to become comfortable with that it's not on our time all the time.
Yeah, for sure.
So we probably should end in prayer as usual. And I'm going to ask Father Chris if we can focus on a prayer where we have peace and that we approach these topics with people with peace in mind. This is for me mostly. And that we listen more than we tell in life, but know when to tell.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. good and gracious God, the truth will set us free. It will free us to love what is truly good, and to embrace the peace that you offer us, not as the world gives it, but as you give it. We know that the world is often divided by dissension, discord, tribalism, dysfunctional politics. There's division in our families. There's division in our church. Help us to be a church that discerns, dialogues, listens, and proclaims and witnesses to your truth, which is beautiful and good and always a gift to us. And we ask this in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
I do know one absolute truth, and that truth is you should be listening to this podcast. That's an absolute truth. So tell your friends and family.
Yeah.
Keep building it and let
And
them
comment.
know about it.
Let us know.
And comment.
Let us know what you want to hear as well. What kind of topics
We'll
are
actually
you
look at them.
interested in? Yeah.
Unless I don't like the comment, then I'm going to disregard it. No, I'm
Not
just
going to
kidding.
accept correction.
I'm not going to accept correction. I'm bad at that. But as we end, I'm going to ask the question. I'm not even going to ask a question. I'm just going to let everybody know that everybody, that we are still
Catholic.
Catholic.